Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
I'm Wolf Blitzer. This is CNN.
Hello, I'm Mindy Kincaid, live at CNN's headquarters here in Atlanta, and this is One World. Well, Pope Francis is on what he calls a trip of penance in Canada right now, apologising for decades of abuse. This hour, he's meeting with Indigenous groups near Edmonton, Alberta. He's expected to give a speech any moment saying sorry, once again, for the Catholic Church's role in the abuse of Canada's Indigenous children in residential schools. The country's Truth and Reconciliation Commission found more than 4,000 Indigenous children died from either neglect or abuse in residential schools, many of which were set up by the Canadian government and run by churches, including the Catholic Church. Well, our correspondent Paula Newton joins us now live from Edmonton, Alberta, with more on all of this. Good to have you there for us, Paula. So the Pope is expected to deliver this historic apology any moment for this abuse against Canadian Indigenous children. It certainly is a long-awaited moment for many survivors.
Absolutely, and they will parse his words so carefully. We do expect an apology that follows up on the one he did in Rome. This one is, of course, on Canadian soil. They are on the grounds of this Indigenous community. There is a powwow underway. It is incredibly poignant and, of course, ceremonial. But Linda, remember, this is about some very, very dark history for the Catholic Church. And the fact that this was not just about isolated incidents of abuse. This was actually about a systemic process by these Catholic institutions to eradicate their cultural, what that Truth and Reconciliation Commission that you referenced there called cultural genocide. And I want you to listen now to how some of the survivors are taking in this papal apology. Listen.
It is a papal trip like no other, one that will see Pope Francis humble himself on behalf of the Catholic Church and apologize to Canada's Indigenous peoples for years of abuse and harm. Only months ago, few could imagine his journey here, one the Pope is calling a journey of penance for what a Canadian National Commission says was cultural genocide. At least 150,000 Indigenous children separated from their families and forced to attend residential institutions where thousands endured physical, sexual, and emotional abuse from priests, nuns, and school staff.
Kneel down the way you made us kneel down as little kids and ask for that forgiveness.
Victoria McIntosh was taken from her family at the age of 4.
My grands made this for me.
This was the coat she says she wore when her mom dropped her off at a Catholic institution in Manitoba in the 1960s.
That nun took it off of me and threw it at my mom.
McIntosh said the nun then called her mother a savage, an incident she said foreshadowed years of abuse. She says her mother never forgave herself.
And I told her, I said, it's not your fault. It wasn't your fault. What choice did you have?
McIntosh says she was sexually assaulted by a priest for years when she was only a child.
He violated me in ways that no child should ever go through. And I would break down and I would cry thinking about it, what he'd done. And I wonder why. What did I do to you?
McIntosh says that priest was 92-year-old Arthur Massé. It was only in June when he was charged with indecent assault. He has not entered a plea. And it is the impunity of the Catholic Church's actions that hangs over this visit, even as dozens of Indigenous communities now search the grounds of these institutions, where hundreds of unmarked graves have already been identified.
As Indigenous communities work to recover their lost children, there is still much ambivalence about the Pope's visit and his apology. The Pope was blunt. He called it a journey of penance.
I don't know. That's interesting interpretation of it, right? You know, for me, it's not a journey, right? It was more than a journey for our people, I think, and the journey will never end, right? It's going to be there forever.
Pope Francis says he acknowledges that, but hopes this historic gesture of atonement will bring some measure of relief and healing.
And Linda, there's something I want to make clear to our audiences if you haven't heard this concept before. These survivors deal with what they call intergenerational trauma. It didn't just affect them. It affected generations, whether it was children or grandchildren and beyond. And that is because they say they were not given any kind of family contact. They were deprived of basic love and affection that they didn't get in these schools. Now, having said that, they will be parsing this apology that we are about to hear just in the next few minutes. And again, they want to see the whole apology and understand in its sincerity what it means to them. They do not want token words. Linda?
Exactly. There's so much trauma remaining. And Paula, the true extent of this abuse is still coming to light. More remains have been discovered in recent months.
Absolutely, and the issue that it lingers is with what we have going on throughout the entire country, and that is the searching for those unmarked graves of children. What happened in these institutions, and remember they ran for more than a century, in the late 19th century, the last one just closed in 1996. These children would sometimes disappear. Their families were not even told of this in any kind of timely fashion, and no one knew where these children were. And yet at dozens of sites across Canada right now, they are searching the grounds either at these institutions or adjacent to them, looking for the remains of children. We have had a few sites already that unfortunately have identified hundreds of these sites already. They are using very high-tech tools, Linda, to make sure that those children are remembered and they have that spiritual homecoming that they never received in their death. A lot still to go through here, and you can understand by me just peeling back the layers here, the difficult task for the Pope ahead. Even though many believe his sincerity, they just are now again triggered and re-traumatized by him even being here on Canadian soil. Linda?
Yeah, exactly. Paula Hancock's first, thanks so much. Paula Newton, sorry. Thanks so much for joining us. We will bring you those remarks live when they happen. Pope Francis in Canada to apologize for years of abuse. Well, Ukraine says it is ready to start implementing a landmark deal aimed at easing a global food crisis within days. But with Russia defending its weekend attack on a critical Black Sea port, that agreement remains very much in doubt. On Friday, Kyiv and Moscow signed accords brokered by Turkey and the United Nations that would allow Ukraine to export millions of tons of grain trapped by months of war. Well, less than 24 hours later, Russian cruise missiles slammed into Odessa's harbour, the main port named in that pact. Moscow maintains there's nothing in the agreement to prevent its troops from going after military targets. But the Kremlin also insists that the strikes will not affect grain shipments. Well, meanwhile, on the ground, Ukraine says its forces are making progress in the Russian-occupied Kherson region. And to the east, where the most intense fighting is taking place, there are conflicting reports over Moscow's claims of territorial gains. Well, CNN's Nick Robertson is following all the developments and joins us now live from Kyiv. Good to have you with us, Nick. So it has taken a lot of negotiation to get to an agreement to export the grain from Ukraine. Is that now under threat, given Russia's recent strike in the port city of Odessa?
Well, it certainly called Russia's credibility into question, not just because the missile strikes that they perpetrated within hours, less than 24 hours of actually signing the agreement, but their initial response was to tell the Turkish intermediaries, and this was coming from Russia's defense minister, that they hadn't fired these missiles at all. And then obviously on a day later, they backtracked on that, backtracked and said they had fired them, and then even later again doubled down on it and said they have the right to continue continue to fire at military targets. They claim that they hit military targets in the port there in Odessa. So that tension exists, and that really both undermines Russia's credibility for its word signing the deal, but also its credibility with the principal interlocutors here, Turkey and the United Nations. But, you know, what we've heard from Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, also adds another layer of tension and questioning Russia's real intent here, because he has talked about things that are not in the deal. He has said that Russian ships will have the right to escort these grain convoy ships once they get out into the Black Sea. That is not written into the UN agreement. And indeed, I spoke to Ukraine's infrastructure minister, who signed the deal, along with Russia's defense minister in Istanbul on Friday. And Ukraine's infrastructure minister told me that what Sergei Lavrov is saying is not going to happen. Russia will not be able to escort these ships.
So we won't allow to do this. Our territorial waters and our seaports, only Ukraine and Ukrainian Navy will be there. So if you're talking about like inspections and all these issues, it will be in near Turkey. It will be near Bosphorus, and will be led by Turkey and by United Nations.
So no Russian ships escorting the convoys anywhere along the convoy?
Ships at all in this process.
But Ukraine says it's committed. The infrastructure minister told me they've sent people just today to the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul, which will sort of oversee how this whole agreement plays out. They'll oversee the shipping lanes. They'll oversee the inspection of the vessels. So Ukrainian officials are saying they think within a couple of days they could begin exporting the grain by the end of the week.
And Nick, in terms of the battle on the ground, Ukraine is talking up its counteroffensive against Russia in Kherson. What are both sides saying?
Well, Ukraine says that it's being able to make some gains, that the use of the HIMARS weapon system is allowing them to make some strategic strikes against ammunition stores, against key bridges. And they think that this is giving them an advantage, that there have been attacks behind the lines in cooperation with the Ukrainian resistance there, who are trapped behind Russia's, or trapped in the areas that Russia controls, that they've been making gains there. Russia, on the other hand, says that it is, it is holding that ground, that it's able to, that it's continuing to push out and attack areas in Ukrainian control. The lines, as far as we can see, are not moving. There's a much bigger, it feels, Russian military offensive underway in the east of the country, around Kramatorsk, and the town of Bakhmut really seems to be sort of coming under a lot of intense fire. Villages around there, that's where Russia seems to be making the advance, but also increasing its offensive in the north of the country around Kharkiv as well. So in the south around Kherson, it is counterclaims, but in other areas, Russia is not taking ground, but has definitely ramped up over the past couple of weeks its impact.
Nick Robertson for us in Kyiv. Good to have you staying across the door for us. Thanks very much. Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports is hurting developing countries the most, even igniting famine fears in some parts of drought-stricken Africa. But the Kremlin's message to the continent: blame the West. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in the Republic of Congo, the second stop of his four-nation African tour, designed in part to shore up support for Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Well, Ukraine is slamming Lavrov's trip, calling it, quote, the quintessence of sadism. CNN's Larry Madowo joins us now from Nairobi. Larry, good to have you with us. So Russia's foreign minister in Africa trying to shore up support for Russia as it continues to wage this brutal war in Ukraine. The former US ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, who is now with US aid, also in the continent, and you got a chance to interview her. What did she tell you, Larry?
She talked about trying to find alternative ways, Linda, to get grain out of Ukraine if Russia's blockade of the Black Sea continues. But it's interesting juxtaposition between a senior U.S. official here, Samantha Power, at the same time almost overlapping with Sergei Lavrov, who's getting a red carpet welcome here in Africa, trying to rally African countries to Russia's side. In Egypt, he spoke with the leadership there and even the Arab League, and he's just been in Congo meeting with President Sassou Nguesso there, where he was received like a head of state, like with all full honors. And that's the likely reception he will get when he goes to Uganda to meet with President Museveni, and later in Ethiopia with the leadership there, and possibly with the African Union. So a real interesting contrast with the message from Samantha Power that countries that have sat out this war, like China, should do more to alleviate the suffering from the global food crisis, and they need to step up. Here's what she told me.
This is a moment for all countries that play leadership roles in the international system, as the People's Republic of China clearly aspires to do and has done in certain domains. It is for them, for all of us, to show up and to dig deeper than we have so far if we are going to prevent this crisis from becoming a catastrophe.
How big is the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine into the current problem you're seeing in Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia?
In terms of food, just coming from Somalia, more than half of the wheat in this country, in the country of Somalia, comes from Ukraine. It is trapped in the port of Odessa. 20 million metric tons of wheat and corn are trapped. So, you know, we can all hope and even pray that the deal that the United Nations negotiated, but that Russia immediately turned its back on by bombing the port of Odessa, that deal somehow sticks.
Do you worry about Russia's commitment to that deal if literally just hours after it was signed they're already bombing Odessa? And what impact would that have if they don't honor the end of the deal?
Well, we have been living the contingency plan because there's no way you can trust anything that Vladimir Putin says. We are working with the Ukrainians on Plan B. Plan B involves road and rail and river and, again, you know, sending in barges and you know, adjusting the rail systems so that they're better aligned with those in Europe so that the exports can move out more quickly. But there is no substitute for Putin allowing the blockade to end, his blockade to end, and the grains being sent out the most efficient way possible, especially because we've lost so much time.
One of the immediate impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been high food, fuel, and fertilizer prices here in Africa. And Sergei Lavrov meeting leaders here has to go beyond just saying we don't have the stain of colonization and you're good partners and we have long-standing relations. He's got to answer some questions to these African leaders why they're, in the case of Uganda, Linda, even protests about high commodity prices there related to their war.
All right, Larry Madowo, good to have you for us. And Kenya, thanks so much for that report. Well, right now, the Pope is in Alberta, Canada, where he's expected to apologise to survivors of abuse who are in schools in Canada that were government-run schools run by the Catholic Church. He's just been taking a moment of silence at the cemetery where many remains of children who were once in those schools are buried. He's expected to issue an apology to the Indigenous community of Canada in the coming moments, and we will bring you that apology live when it happens with much analysis. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Islamic art, particularly geometry, is utterly fascinating to me. It's so old, but yet so complex. I grew up in Abu Dhabi. From an inspirational perspective, the Grand Mosque is just this marvelous, serene space. They use a lot of the floral motifs, and it's influenced my work. The type of art I make is predominantly made with paper and very fine layers of wood. So it's the structures, the patterns, the level of detail. When you repeat and you create symmetry, it becomes really beautiful. It's always about like this journey of discovery of like, well, what could I do with that and what's possible?
Art is an universal language that inspires people to make a difference and to think about the situation. It doesn't only touch their mind, it touches their soul. My name is Audrey Decker, and I am the co-founder of Street Art for Mankind. Today, there are 152 million children, 1 child out of 10, who is suffering from child labor. Street Art for Mankind is a non-profit organization that believe in art for social change. And that's what we do with big murals made by artists from all around the world. We started Street Art for Mankind around the fight against child labor and trafficking, and we have a series of murals in the financial district of New York, which are called the Freedom Murals. We also have a billboard campaign that we did, and that's called the Free Children Campaign. And this one we did with the street artists, but also with people who are really involved in the cause, such as Ashley Judd, Mira Sorvino, Kailash Satyarthi, Siddharth Kara, and also Nick Christoph. Our dream for Street Art for Mankind is really to create outdoor museums everywhere around the world, to have this capacity to inspire people and create art.
Welcome back to One World. You're looking at live pictures right now of Pope Francis in Alberta, Canada, where he's expected to address the Indigenous people. He's expected to apologize for years of abuse of children in residential schools. These were schools run by the Canadian government along with various churches, including the Catholic Church. His speech is meant to happen momentarily. We have with us our senior Vatican analyst, John Allen, to give us a sense of what we can expect. John, this is a significant moment, isn't it? Obviously, the Pope expressing penance for abuse that happened to Indigenous people that lasted many generations.
Yeah, that's right, Linda. I mean, listen, papal apologies for the clerical sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church have become distressingly familiar in recent decades. But this is a specific case in which we're not just talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about physical, emotional, even cultural abuse, what the Canadian government has referred to as cultural genocide. I think Pope Francis is well aware that the expectations among Canada's Indigenous peoples are extraordinarily high on this trip. They are expecting an apology, of course, probably more than one, because Pope Francis will meet with different groups of Indigenous peoples during the 5 days he's in Canada. But they're also expecting this to kickstart concrete change that would include issues such as opening the archives of the Catholic Church, which are scattered and unorganized, but in an effort to be able to get to the bottom of what actually happened to these roughly 150,000 children, most of whom are forcibly removed from their homes and placed in these residential schools. They're also expecting the beginning of a serious commitment to financial reparations on the part of the Catholic Church. So yes, I think the Indigenous peoples of Canada want an apology, Linda, but they also want much more than that.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that, because years ago there was a huge class action settlement in Canada to recognize the damage inflicted on thousands of Indigenous children in Canada at various residential schools. Take us through the process. What are these steps in terms of after the apology? What comes next?
Well, again, I think there are sort of two key demands or requests being made by representatives of the various Indigenous groups. Bear in mind that there are more than 600 Indigenous groups in Canada, 50 nations, 50 separate languages. They don't all speak with one voice, obviously, so it depends on who you talk to in terms of what people want. But in general, I think they want, first of all, a reckoning, a historical reckoning, particularly having to do with these unmarked graves. They want to know who these children were, what happened to their families. They want to be able to bring closure to those families, and they want the church's cooperation in that process. The difficulty on the church side is there's no central database here. We're talking about archives that are scattered, in some cases non-existent. In some cases, we're talking about a mix of public and ecclesiastical records. It's going to be complicated, but I think people want to see a full-fledged commitment of the church to participate in that. The other is reparations. There have been legal settlements. There has been action on the part of the Canadian government. The Catholic bishops in Canada have pledged to raise about $30 million as at least a down payment on reparations. So far, they have raised somewhere between $4 and $5 million. People, I think, have the active hope that this trip will light a fire under those efforts. And I think that the difficulty here for the Pope, I think we all expect him to deliver heartfelt, moving, plaintive apologies. This is a Pope whose sympathies clearly are with those who have suffered, with those who have been marginalized. But I think the danger is that if that's all that comes out of this trip, that is those apologies, without the action, the follow-through that people are looking for, it may end up looking like a somewhat hollow exercise, Linda.
Yeah, you're exactly right. People need more than just an apology to find some sort of healing, some sort of justice from this. In terms of what goes into a speech like this, what goes into an apology, we've just been looking at live pictures of the Pope being wheeled along in a wheelchair, quite frail as he does this 6-day trip throughout Canada, meeting with various groups of the Indigenous community. Talk to us about how his team puts together the words to speak to people, words that he hopes will impact the community.
Well, first of all, I do want to point out, Linda, you mentioned the wheelchair. It's worth noting that earlier this month, Pope Francis actually was forced to cancel a similar trip to Africa. He was supposed to go to South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a trip that had been planned for a long time, very close to the Pope's heart. But the knee problems he's having, the osteoarthritis in the right knee that has confined him largely to either a wheelchair or a cane for public appearances, forced him to scrub that. The fact that he is making this trip despite that crippling pain, I do think is one indication of how important Pope Francis understands this to be. Listen, in terms of the process behind crafting the Pope's words, I would say it's a three-stage thing. One, the trip organizers, there's a staff in the Vatican that does the kind of prep work for these trips. They will have consulted the local bishops' conference, that is the bishops, the Catholic bishops of Canada. They will also have consulted the Pope's ambassador in Canada, that's a figure called a nuncio, which literally in Latin means messenger, for recommendations, suggestions, suggested language. That then comes to Rome. There is a team of people who will put together drafts, but then it goes in front of the Pope. And if there is one thing we know about Pope Francis, he is not the kind of leader who simply signs off on documents put in front of him for the sake of it. He will very much want to make this his own. So when we hear this apology in just a few moments, and we are certain that it will be an apology, it will be the first of several he will deliver while he is in Canada. Although there will have been several cooks in the kitchen, Linda, at the end of the day, you can be sure this is very much Pope Francis's personal message.
Yeah, he is indeed meant to speak about his personal sorrow and shame for having the church involved in years and years of abuse in these residential schools in Canada. Thanks to you, John Allen. We will bring you back momentarily when the Pope addresses the Indigenous community in Canada. For now, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching CNN.
Going Green, in association with Kirloskar, Limitless.
It almost feels like every young person that I speak to today has a project, has an idea, and has that longing to take action. And this is simply because we're coming from a generation that is living through the climate crisis. Hello everybody, good morning, it's Malati. We are growing up in a world where when we turn on the television or listen to the radio or swipe and scroll through our social media, every other post, every other story is about the world that we are living in. And especially here in the global south, in a country like Indonesia, we are already experiencing it. And then we start to think, one day it could be us. What can we do to change that? So young people today, yes, we are very much at the front lines. We know that we have to take action today if we want a world and a future that we can be proud of.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN Partner Hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
I'm Jim Bitterman in Paris, and this is CNN.
Hello and welcome back to One World. I'm Linda Kincaid. You're looking right now at live pictures. Pope Francis is expecting to address the Indigenous community near Edmonton, Canada, any moment now. He's expected to apologise for decades of abuse of Indigenous children at residential schools, which they were forced to attend. Many of those schools were run by the Catholic Church. Well, today's event is taking place at the former site of one of those schools. We will bring you those remarks from Pope Francis when they happen. For now, I want to welcome back our Vatican analyst, our senior Vatican analyst, John Allen. John, good to have you with us again. Certainly, this is a very significant moment for the Indigenous community in Canada. Explain why the Pope is apologising today and what this moment may mean.
Well, Linda, that's a great question. I mean, in part because, you know, representatives of several of the Indigenous groups in Canada actually came to the Vatican in April to meet with Pope Francis. They met over the course of a week. He met with them several times. I mean, this is more time, Linda, than the Pope gives the President of the United States. It's more time than he gives the Secretary General of the UN. It's more time than he gives to his own bishops. So it was kind of extraordinary. And during those meetings, Pope Francis apologized individually to each of the different groups and then collectively to all of them at the end. So you could kind of say, been there, done that. But one of the points that was made during those sessions is that given the sacredness of land in Indigenous traditions, it was critically important for Pope Francis not simply to apologize, but to apologize on the land of these Indigenous groups, to come to them and to stand where these horrors happened and to deliver his apology there. That was a key demand, and I think it is something that was critically important to Pope Francis to be able to deliver. That's what we're going to see here, Linda, in short order.
And as you mentioned, many of the Indigenous children who went to these residential schools were either sexually, physically, or spiritually abused. The remains of some of those children found in cemeteries and graves around the schools, including the one where the Pope is speaking today. And earlier we saw the Pope praying at that cemetery. Let's listen in now. The Pope about to address the community.
Hey, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our drum song, the drum, and all our drums right across Turtle Island. It is a symbol of the heartbeat of Mother Earth. It's a symbol of the heartbeat of each and every one of us. We have a heartbeat. It represents the heartbeat of all animals and living things. So it is very powerful. It's healing. And Again, it is a very special afternoon to be able to witness this and have this very sacred song introduce our visitor. So at this time, we're going to go into what we call a grand entry. We're going to be honoring our chiefs. They will be coming in from the east side will be our current chiefs, and to the south will be our former chiefs. So at this time, we're going to go into a grand entry song, what we call a grand entry song. Aha. Singers, Nigabuk. Ladies and gentlemen, our chiefs, every nation has an eagle staff. We have our eagle staffs leading our grand entry procession. The eagle staff represents our sovereignty. Our nations are represented by the eagle staffs. The history of our nations are represented with our eagle staffs. At this time, we're going to be coming in and calling in our great chiefs wearing the war bonnets. Our war bonnets are very sacred to us. War bonnets represent leadership of our nation, leadership amongst all our nations. The war bonnet, the eagle bonnet, represents who we are as a nation. So right here we got our Four Nations chiefs coming in at this time. Again, welcome to Maskochis. We have our four chiefs, our Four Nations chiefs, and also our Grand Chief, Dr. Wilton Littlechild. So ladies and gentlemen, on this side, Sagas Tedok. Sagas Tedok is the east. The east represents the sun. The sun gives us light. The sun gives us health. The sun is one of the most powerful things the Creator has given us. As people, as First Nations people, we acknowledge the sun for healing and health. Hiya! So right now we have our former chiefs. We also have represented here, we have all our chiefs within our territory, Treaty 6 territory, and also visiting chiefs from other First Nations in the war bonnets. Tapos mga higo kay nice kamig. Tapos higo, higo magisigaw. Tapos kakisiya. Hego tahanma. Hanma mihtatamuin. Mihtatamuin. Hego ma. Hego tse. Hego ba kapmise. Kawi maispike. Tapwe. Tapngasiya pingo ek. Ek takiam. Tapune tamik. Tapune tamak. Hanma kiano tatsesun. Niga anemia. Hey tawase ao kiam. Han makipmatsuin no ay suniga anemia. Kitawasim sinawag. Mina kakyo ko simnawag. Mina angge kape no gustik. Hey ko takiab tap mohtin getsik. 한마 기고이 다가기 또 가고측.
Our senior Vatican analyst John Allen is standing by to explain the significance of what we're seeing. Pope Francis right now in Canada to apologise for the Indigenous community for years of abuse at the hands of the Church. Pope Francis, very important there to see the Indigenous people honour their traditions after what the government in Canada found was cultural genocide during the period of time that the churches ran these so-called residential schools.
Yeah, Linda, I was just sitting here thinking how extraordinary these images are. I mean, the residential schools were the centerpiece of what was a kind of coordinated effort in a way to eradicate Indigenous cultures in Canada. And as you've rightly pointed out, the Catholic Church, to a significant extent, participated in that project. The Pope is here to apologize for that, but today, because of the Pope's presence and the kind of global media spotlight that creates, we're seeing an opportunity for those cultures to do their thing, to show who they are, to celebrate their heritage, their history, through music, through dance, through speech, through their customs. I mean, in other words, in a way, the Catholic Church once participated in an effort to snuff out these cultures. Today, in the person of the Pope, it's participating in an effort to celebrate those cultures, which in some ways just illustrates how much the wheel has turned between then and now, Linda.
Yeah, we're seeing the banging of the drums there, signifying what they said was the heartbeat of all things living. But in terms of the apology we are expecting from the Pope, this is not the first time the Pope has apologised to the Indigenous people of Canada for the abuse that happened at the hands of the Church in these schools. What's the significance of him being there in person on a site of a now mostly demolished former school?
Well, to begin with, Linda, while you're right, the Pope has apologized for this legacy of abuse before. He has never done so on Canadian soil. And that has been a key request of the Indigenous peoples from the very beginning, that the Pope come to them to stand on their land where these horrors happened and deliver an apology there. And so in that sense, no matter what else Pope Francis does, his physical presence today, coupled with the apology that, as you rightly say, we all expect him to deliver shortly, that is in and of itself historically significant. I think beyond that, the Pope has said that he has come to Canada as part of a pilgrimage of penance and that he wants to begin a process of healing and reconciliation. Now, the question is, what will it take for real healing, real reconciliation to happen? I think what Indigenous have been saying for some time now is that they want to see a real commitment from the Church to get to the truth about what happened at these residential schools, that is, to document the fates of the children who ended up there, to be able to bring closure to their families about what happened. And then secondly, to make a serious commitment to doing justice, including financial reparations for the survivors, for their families, for their heirs. People are hoping, and I think, frankly, they're more than hoping, they are expecting that they will hear a commitment to those two aims from Pope Francis while he is in Canada, and that there will be action on the back end of this trip resulting from it. I think if those two things happen, then I think people will see this as a real turning point. If they don't, then I think the risk for the Pope is that these apologies may ring a bit hollow, Linda.
And we are awaiting, we are keeping a close eye on Pope Francis. He is expected to address the Indigenous people of Canada any moment to apologise for the years of abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church in these residential schools. In terms of what comes next, you were speaking about this could potentially be a hollow apology if there isn't any action after that. We know years ago there was a huge class action settlement to recognise the damage inflicted on the Indigenous community. In terms of any sort of other financial compensation, what else? What are you expecting? Are we expected to hear any sort of monetary figure today? Will that come down the track? Will there be more conversations between the Catholic Church and the Indigenous people? Take us through the process.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. If there is anything we have learned from the clerical abuse scandals in the Catholic Church over the last basically 3 decades, it is that no amount of money can ever wipe the slate clean. No amount of money can ever adequately compensate for the suffering of victims of abuse performed by people who are supposed to represent the mercy of God. That said, financial compensation is perhaps the best of the various imperfect instruments that we have to try to do justice to the people who have suffered this appalling abuse. In terms of what comes next, the Catholic bishops of Canada have committed to trying to raise at least $30 million to pay reparations, basically to fund projects for various Indigenous communities as a way of trying to compensate for the harm that they suffered. To date, they have raised somewhere between $4 and $5 million, which leaves the bulk of the money yet to be raised. So far, it has been a slow and painful process. I think the hope is that the Pope's presence in Canada, the spotlight he is going to shine on this legacy of abuse, particularly for the Catholic community in Canada, will galvanize those efforts and sort of kickstart that and move to fairly quickly to a situation in which that reparation fund can be fully funded. We will see if that indeed happens. That is certainly one expectation, Linda.
And earlier, John, we saw the Pope being pushed around the grounds in a wheelchair. He is looking quite frail. He's 85 years old. And this is a pretty big trip for the Pope. It's over the course of a week, and he is going to many, many areas to make sure he meets with many Indigenous communities.
This is what we call our victory song here at this time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, Linda, I mean, just this month, Pope Francis had to call off a week-long trip to Africa. He was supposed to be in the countries of South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are two countries that he's been passionate about for a long time. That was a trip very close to his heart. But yet, this knee condition, osteoarthritis in his right knee, which makes it very painful for him to walk or to stand, that forced him to call off that trip. He has had to curtail a number of public activities here in Rome. And yet, and frankly, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, you know, I would have said it is 50-50 whether he's actually able to go to Canada because of the limitations that he's now facing. And yet, I mean, there he is. You know, we are looking at these live images from Moscovichus right now. And I think that is one index of how important this moment is to Pope Francis, and I think also the depth of his understanding of how important it is to these Indigenous communities in Canada. Linda.
Yeah, exactly. You make a really good point there. John, if you can just stand by for us, I want to bring in our Vatican correspondent, Delia Gallagher, who is traveling with the Pope. She joins us now on the phone. And Delia, we were just speaking about the fact that the Pope is quite frail looking on this trip, but it is very important that he be there today in person. Give us a sense of the feeling on the ground amongst the community there that he's addressing.
Well, Linda, I hope you can see the live pictures. I mean, I am standing here in Moscovichus. This is a former site of one of the largest residential schools in Canada. This is an event specifically for the Indigenous people in this community. Obviously, I can speak to the color, to the drums, to the enthusiasm, although it is a subdued enthusiasm, I have to say, of the crowds here, aside from the rainy weather. There's a bit of sun coming through. But when we've been speaking to the people, what they've been saying is, look, we want to hear an apology from the Pope. We are aware that this is a historic moment, that he has come to our soil. Remember, this was a request of the Indigenous community when they came to the Vatican in April, and specifically hoping for the Pope to come to Canada to touch their soil, essentially. And that's what you're witnessing right now. But the testimonies, they gave some testimonies before the Pope arrived, and of course they're harrowing testimonies, and most of them said, look, an apology is important, but we also want to see some action. They have various requests such as opening up archives of the Catholic Church in Canada and the Vatican to try to understand exactly the facts of what happened at that time. So some of the things that we're looking for from the Pope when he speaks is, yes, an apology, but also action, they say. And that is one of the actionable steps that they're hoping to see from the Pope. So I would describe the mood as kind of somber and expectation. You know, the apology is important, but even Pope Francis said this is one step on a journey. It's not the end step. It's a start. It's a reconciliation, and it will obviously take some time. The survivor said, look, you know, there's no apology that can actually get rid of the trauma that they have gone through, but I think there's an appreciation that this is really a historical moment. They have requested that a pope come to their soil, and this is what they're getting today. Linda?
Yeah, it is a long-awaited apology in Canada, given that this sort of abuse went on for decades, from the early 1900s up until the 1970s. And Delia, even now, in recent months, the remains of some of the victims from these schools are still being uncovered.
Well, that's right. And I think that was one of the impetuses when there were some more unmarked graves discovered in 2021. I think that was one of the impetuses for the Pope to finally say, yes, I must come over and I must be part of this reconciliation. And I think one of the messages of Pope Francis, you know, this entire trip is, he's called it a trip of penance. So it's a very different kind of papal trip. He's not here to sort of meet state governors and politicians, although he will be doing that. But every single stop along the way, this is going to be 6 days, and this is the first one, is geared towards this act of penance. And I think that part of what the Pope is hoping to do, as we know, he's very involved with indigenous cultures all around the world. And what he wants to do, in addition to sort of apologizing and trying to help the healing of individual indigenous survivors, is also to say to the rest of the world, look, we need to pay attention to these communities. We need to help revitalize these communities. I think that's an important message. We saw that in the Amazon from the Pope. So I'm sure we'll be hearing some of that from him as well this week, that, you know, just doesn't end with a kind of papal trip. Part of the point is, yes, to find out the historical facts of what happened, but also to appreciate these communities, which in the end are so close to the earth, are really part of those communities who have first loved the earth. And that's really an important message for Pope Francis. Linda?
Yeah, exactly. And Delia, we were just seeing the Pope meeting with the chiefs of the various Indigenous tribes there in Alberta, Canada. And we must point out that the Canadian government apologised as well back in 2008 and 2015 and issued a report, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, describing what happened in some of these schools as cultural genocide. So very significant today to have the Indigenous communities have this display of their traditions.
Yeah, and I want to say another thing. I mean, there have been apologies from the Vatican as well, and the Pope indeed apologized in April. The difference is, I think, having the Pope here, this is really more symbolic. You know, just before he arrived here on the stage that I hope you're looking at, he was at a cemetery nearby, Indigenous cemetery, and typical of Pope Francis, what he wanted to do there was in total silence. You know, he was there in silence because there is an aspect of this which he believes can't be resolved by any kind of inquiries or any kind of apologies. There needs to be some kind of supernatural grace, as it were, that is only available through prayer and just through presence. So I think there's a large symbolic part, obviously, of the Pope coming here today. And then, as the Indigenous have asked, that it be followed by actionable steps.
Absolutely. Our thanks to you, Delia. If you can just stand by for us. That was Delia Gallagher, who's travelling with the Pope. I want to go to Paula Newton, who joins us from Edmonton, Alberta. And Paula, you have been speaking with survivors of abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church in these residential schools. What do they want to hear today?
What they want to hear is a wholesome apology. And what I mean by that is not just taking responsibility for the actions of individual people that worked at these schools, whether it was priests, nuns, or staff.